Hi everyone, my name is Lauren DeVinny, and today I'm going to be doing my philosopher presentation on the women's rights activist Mary Wollstonecraft. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start today's presentation with a quote by Mary Wollstonecraft. "I am fearless, and that is my power." Personally, I think one of the biggest things that holds us back in our life is our own fear of failure. After listening to that quote, pause the video and reflect on what you would accomplish if you had no fear. To answer this question myself, I think back to a speech I once heard on the F words of the 21st century, and those words are fear and failure. And I often think about how scared I am to fail and how much anxiety that gives me. And I think if I wasn't scared to fail and I had no fear, I would take more risks. And that would probably make me a better teacher and a better person. One thing, very specifically and kind of silly, is I would probably learn how to do a backflip. I think that I can physically do it, but I'm so scared that I'm going to hurt myself that I will probably never try or learn how to do a backflip. Unlike me and my severe fear of failure when doing a backflip, Wollstonecraft had no fear, and that was her power. Today we'll be learning how, against all odds, she had a profound impact on our education system. Before we get started on the main content of the presentation, I'm going to introduce the 5 W's and How worksheet. So there's 6 sections in the worksheet: who, what, where, why, when, and how. So please fill in these columns while listening to the presentation. And a reminder to keep this handy as you'll need it at the end of the presentation. We will now be moving into the historical background of Wollstonecraft's philosophy. Here's a reminder to pause the video throughout the presentation to fill in the 5 W's and How worksheet. Let's get started. Mary Wollstonecraft was born during the Enlightenment in England. One of her biggest accomplishments was being entirely self-educated, as women at this time were not allowed to go to school and come up with theories and have independent thought like men were. She also wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. This is considered one of the earliest and most important works advocating equality for women. The essay is often seen as the foundation of modern women's rights movements in the Western world. I think it's also important to note that she died during childbirth. Now to dive deeper into the Enlightenment. It spanned from 1680 to 1820. It was also known as the Age of Reason. It was marked by a period of discovery and learning. There was a rise in new sciences, faith in reason, and expansion in trade. It is also important to note that the Atlantic slave trade was huge during this time, and England was a large player in this trade. This period was also marked by aggressive European expansion. It is important to note that although a lot of inventions and ways of thought came out of this time period, almost all of them were developed by men. Before I move into the explanation of the philosophy, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions. All right, let's get started with the explanation of the philosophy. I would like to start this section with a quote by Mary Wollstonecraft that had a lasting impact on me. "Mind has no gender. Physical characteristics have no impact on the mind. Teachers should always listen to their students and not judge them based on preconceived notions." Now, finally, onto the heart of the presentation, Mary Wollstonecraft's philosophy. She believed that women should have the right to an education. At the age of 24, she even opened up a school entirely for women. She said the ability to grasp truth and acquire knowledge is actually what sets human beings apart from animals. She stated that women should not just hope their husbands will be intelligent. In fact, an uneducated woman, Wollstonecraft argues, cannot be a fit comparison for an educated man. Her ignorance will reduce the progress of human knowledge and virtue, and it will prevent her from teaching her children these values. As I mentioned before, Wollstonecraft grew up during the British Enlightenment. This period was marked by inventions and theories solely by men. As you can imagine, Wollstonecraft philosophy gained a lot of backlash from other people and important theorists and philosophers. They accused her of not knowing a woman's place in the world. She argued that actually allowing women to go to school did not contradict their role as a mother. She said that meek wives are in general foolish mothers, so educated women will teach their children to be good citizens. She also argued that it should be up to women like her to prove to other people what they're capable of. Moving on to her beliefs. She says that parents raise their daughters to be docile and domesticated. She also argues against women being irrational creatures. She says that if women were taught from a young age to develop their mind and go to school, then they would have the same intellectual capabilities as men. They would be able to support themselves financially and understand politics if they were educated. She said the world is underestimating women, which couldn't have been more true at this time period. One of her biggest and most prominent aspects of her philosophy and beliefs is that she believed in co-ed schools. And as you can imagine, this got even more backlash than her wanting women to have the right to education. Before we move into the application of Wollstonecraft philosophy, I'm going to take a second to remind you to make sure you're still filling out the 5 W's and how worksheet. And I'm also going to take a few seconds to pause and ask if there's any questions. All right, let's move into the application. I believe the most prominent and important application of Wollstonecraft's philosophy is co-education. She fought for equal education opportunities for men and women, but also under the same building and in the same classrooms. She said that co-education will improve the virtue and intellect of men and women. She was one of the first people to bring up such a radical idea. Of course, it was regarded as nonsense at first. Many men didn't want to lose the power they had over women, but Wollstonecraft did not stop fighting for it. Her response to the men that did not want to lose power over women was simply, I do not wish them to have power over men, but over themselves. To expand more on her influence on present day education, as I mentioned before, the co-ed schools. But in my opinion, she set the standard for equal opportunities for all groups. It extends further than just gender. It incorporates diversity of all groups in the schools. Having diversity improves everybody's virtue and intellect. And I think that this movement was started by Mary Wollstonecraft, even if she didn't know it. Her impact on present day schools also had an impact on present day thought. By fighting for educating women and for co-ed schools, she also set in motion the future standard for equal job opportunities for all. She also set the standard that family relationships have the opportunity to be educational ones, now that men and women can be educated. Her vindication of the rights of women later influenced equal rights advocates and suffragist movements for all groups. Before I move into the things that I like and dislike about the philosophy, I would once again like to take a few seconds to ask if there's any questions and to remind you to make sure you're still filling out the 5 W's and how worksheet. All right, let's move into my opinion on the philosophy. Now to move on to the things I like about the theory. So first, coeducation and equal opportunities for men and women. Those are two things that, of course, I stand strongly with. And co-parenting so that all the responsibility is not solely on the mother. And lastly, that family relationships can also be educational ones. Now moving into the things that I don't like, although most of the theory was positive, the one thing that I do not like about it is that it only fought for gender equality at first, and I really do think it should extend to all groups. Her thoughts absolutely align with my teaching style. Everyone should have the right to an education and equal opportunities. Like I mentioned before, the specific element I would add is that the theory should extend to all groups and not just women specifically. Before we move on to the closing activity, make sure you pause the video and finish up your 5 W's and how worksheet. All right, let's get started on our closing activity. So here's a reminder to use your 5 W's and how worksheet as a reference for this activity. As I mentioned before, Wollstonecraft's philosophy and her theory of co-education received an extreme amount of backlash, and people accused her of not knowing a woman's place. So given this backlash, how do you think Wollstonecraft was able to change the mind of Enlightenment thinkers to see the benefit of co-education? Please pause the video to answer this question. Remember to use your 5 W's and how worksheet as a reference while answering this question. So to reflect on my thoughts from the question, I believe that her being self-educated played a really large role in it. She was able to give herself a full education without being allowed in schools. And I think that that determination was a driving factor in people seeing the worth of coeducation. She also saw her own self-worth and the worth of the women in her life. And sometimes seeing your own self-worth can be kind of difficult. She was also fearless, and that was her power. To tie in that quote from the beginning, imagine what you could do if you had no fear, especially of failure. She also dedicated her life to proving them wrong. So every waking second, especially since she wasn't a mother at the time, she was working on this theory and coming up with books and thought process on how to get the world to believe in the benefit of coeducation. And lastly, although she never got to be a mother because she died during childbirth, I would like to think that me and most other mothers would give anything to give their future child a better life than they had. So I think in a way, she was also fighting as hard as she could for her future child to be able to exist in a world where there's coeducation. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching my presentation and completing the activities throughout. I can't wait to hear what you think about it, and I look forward to watching yours. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.